The Green Bicycle Case, England, 1919. In 1919, a young woman named Annie Bella Wright was often seen riding her bicycle through the quiet country roads near Leicester, England. She was 21 years old and lived with her parents and 6 younger brothers and sisters in a small cottage in the village of Stoughton. Her father worked on farms, and Bella helped support the family by working in a rubber factory about 5 miles away. She was friendly, kind, and engaged to a sailor in the Royal Navy. Her future looked happy and bright. On the evening of July 5, 1919, Bella set out on her bicycle to visit her uncle in the nearby village of Galby. She arrived around 7:30 p.m., but her uncle noticed she wasn't alone. A young man with graying hair waited outside on a green bicycle. Bella told her uncle she didn't really know the man, and that he had started talking to her on the road, so her uncle didn't think much of it. Around 8:40 p.m., Bella left the house and rode away with the man. Less than an hour later, she was found dead. A farmer named Joseph Cowell discovered her body lying beside her bicycle on the lonely Gartree Road. At first, he thought it was an accident. Maybe she had fallen and hit her head. The doctor who arrived later agreed, saying she might have crashed. But the next morning, a police officer named Alfred Hall returned to the scene and found something strange. In the daylight, he saw blood on the road, and nearby, a bullet buried in the dirt. When the doctor took another look at Bella's body, he found a gunshot wound below her left eye. Bella Wright had been shot through the head while riding home. The police soon heard from her uncle and cousin that Bella had last been seen with the man on the green bicycle. They gave a good description, but for months no one could find him. Then, 8 months later in February 1920, a canal boat got caught on something in the water. When pulled up, it was a green bicycle, its serial number scratched off. The police dragged the canal and found more pieces of the bike, along with a pistol holster and bullets. A faint number on the bike frame led them to a man named Ronald Vivian Light, a 34-year-old teacher and former soldier. Light was arrested and charged with Bella's murder. He denied everything at first, but witnesses identified him as the man seen waiting outside Bella's uncle's home. During his trial, he finally admitted that he had met Bella and ridden with her that evening, but claimed she was alive when they parted ways. He said he threw the bike into the canal because he panicked after reading news reports that police were looking for a man with a green bicycle. The prosecution said Light's story made no sense, and that the bullets found in the canal matched the type used to kill Bella. 2 young girls also said he had followed and scared them earlier that same day. But Light's lawyer, a famous barrister known as the Great Defender, argued that none of the evidence proved he was the killer. He said the bullet could have come from a hunter by mistake. Light seemed calm and polite in court, and the jury believed him. On June 11, 1920, he was found not guilty and set free. Light lived quietly under a new name until he died at age 89. Bella's family never saw justice. Years later, an old police note was found saying Light had secretly confessed after his trial, claiming the shooting was an accident when his gun went off as Bella touched it. No one knows for sure. To this day, the mystery of the green bicycle case remains unsolved. The strange disappearance of Don Kemp, Wyoming, 1982. Don Kemp was a 35-year-old man from New York City. He worked as an advertising executive and lived a successful, busy life. But in 1976, everything changed after he was in a serious car accident. The crash left him injured and also deeply affected his mind and outlook on life. During his long recovery, Don started to feel unhappy with how his life was going. He no longer cared about money or material things. Instead, he wanted a quieter and more meaningful life. People who suffer from head injuries sometimes go through big personality changes, and Don seemed to be one of them. He became withdrawn, spending most of his time at home reading books and thinking about history. He especially admired Abraham Lincoln and became interested in writing a book about him. After 2 years, Don finally decided to leave everything behind. On September 6, 1982, he He quit his job on Madison Avenue, sold most of his belongings, and packed up his car, a Chevy Blazer. He planned to travel west to Jackson, Wyoming, following the Lincoln Heritage Trail. He wanted to live a simpler life and finish his book about Abraham Lincoln's life and death. While on his journey, Don stopped in Cheyenne, Wyoming, in November 1982. He visited a local museum but accidentally left behind his briefcase, which contained his traveler's checks, diaries, glasses, and other personal items. Museum staff tried to reach him but couldn't. That was the last confirmed sighting of Don Kemp alive. On November 16, 1982, his Blazer was found abandoned on a deserted highway exit near a place called Wagon Hound Rest Area. The engine was still running, the radio was on, all the doors were open, and Don's belongings were scattered around. Snow surrounded the area, and only a single set of footprints led away from the vehicle, disappearing into the open prairie. Police and volunteers began a massive search. They followed the footprints for several miles and found a duffel bag with soap, a teapot, and other small items. In a nearby abandoned barn, they found 3 socks and a pile of sticks and wood, as if someone had tried to build a fire to stay warm. Later, more of Don's things were found, including a laundry bag stuffed in a haystack. But there was still no sign of Don himself. A few days later, a blizzard hit the area, making the search nearly impossible. His mom, Mary Kemp, quit her job and traveled to Wyoming to look for her son. She believed he had been kidnapped and refused to accept that he had simply walked off into the snow. Things became even stranger when one of Don's friends, Judy Aiello, received several phone calls months after he vanished. The calls came from a man who sounded exactly like Don, speaking urgently. When she called the number back, a man in Casper, Wyoming, answered. He denied making the calls and said he had never heard of Don Kemp. The phone number, however, was definitely his. This strange clue was never explained. For years, no one knew what had happened. Then, in 1986, hunters found Don Kemp's remains about 3 miles from where his car had been left. Police concluded that he had simply walked into the freezing wilderness, become lost during the blizzard, and died of exposure. Still, many people, including his friends and mother, never fully accepted that answer. They wondered why Don left his car running, why his items were scattered so far apart, and what the mysterious phone calls meant. A man who left behind success in search of peace, only to vanish under chilling and unexplained circumstances. Reverend Edward Wheeler Hall was a well-known church minister at St. John the Evangelist Episcopal Church in New Brunswick. He was respected and admired for his kind nature, good sermons, and dedication to his community. Edward was married to a woman named Frances Stevens Hall, who came from a rich and powerful family. Many people believed their marriage was not based on love, but rather on her money and social position. One of the choir singers at his church was a woman named Eleanor Elena Reinhardt Mills. She was married to James Mills, the church sexton, and they had 2 children together. However, their marriage was not very happy. Elena and Reverend Hall began meeting in secret, and before long, people started whispering that they were having an affair. On September 16, 1922, 2 people walking along a quiet country lane called DeRussey's Lane made a shocking discovery. Under a crabapple tree, they found the bodies of a man and a woman. The woman's face was covered with a scarf, and the man's face with a hat. When they looked closer, they saw both had been shot. The woman had also had her throat cut. The couple's arms were almost touching, and love letters were torn up and scattered around them. Police arrived soon after, but the scene was quickly spoiled when crowds of curious people rushed in, picking up souvenirs and touching evidence. Even the calling card with the man's name, Reverend Edward Hall, was passed around. When the bodies were identified, the police realized the other victim was Mrs. Elena Mills, his choir singer and rumored lover. Investigators soon ruled out robbery. The couple's jewelry and wallets were still there, though the Reverend's gold watch was missing. Instead, attention turned to their personal lives. The affair between Hall and Mills became the center of the case. At first, police suspected James Mills, Elena's husband. Some thought he had found out about the affair and killed them in a jealous rage. But James had a solid alibi. He had been home that night, and neighbors heard him there. With no evidence against him, police looked elsewhere. Soon, suspicion fell on Frances Hall, the Reverend's wife. Investigators wondered if she had discovered the affair, and with the help of her two brothers, killed both lovers to protect her family's honor. Frances strongly denied this and said she was at home all night, which her maid confirmed. Her brothers, Henry and William Stevens, were also questioned. Some witnesses said they had seen people like them near the crime scene, but nothing could be proven. Months passed with no arrests, but public interest never faded. The case became known nationwide as the Hall Mills murders. Then in 1926, a surprising new statement revived it. Louise, once Frances Hall's maid, married a man who later claimed his wife confided that Frances and her brothers confronted Reverend Hall and Mrs. Mills on the night of the murder, and that the brothers carried out the killings. The story caused another wave of attention. A new investigation began, and Frances Hall and her brothers were finally charged with the murders. Before the trial, Mrs. Mills's body was exhumed for a new autopsy, which found her tongue had been cut out. The trial began in November 1926 and became a huge public event. Crowds filled the courthouse every day, eager to hear the latest drama. One key witness was a pig farmer named Jane Gibson, nicknamed the Pig Woman. She claimed she had seen 4 people at the scene that night and heard gunshots and a woman screaming. But her story changed several times, and the defense argued she was not reliable. In the end, the evidence was too weak. Frances Hall and her brothers were found not guilty, and no one was ever convicted. The death of Kurt Sova, Ohio, 1981. In October 1981, 17-year-old Kurt Sova from Newburgh Heights, Ohio, went missing and was later found dead under strange circumstances. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to him. Kurt was described as a happy, friendly, and artistic teenager. He liked sports, was good with his hands, and got along with everyone. He lived with his parents and had 3 older brothers who cared deeply for him. On Friday, October 23, 1981, Kurt skipped school and spent the day with his best friend, Sam Carroll. That evening, the two went to a party about 2 miles away from Kurt's home. The party was hosted by a woman named Debbie and her brother Clayton in a duplex they shared with another roommate, Missy. Most of the people at the party were adults over 21, and there was plenty of alcohol and some drugs. Kurt, who was still underage, was seen drinking Everclear, a very strong type of alcohol. Just 1 shot of Everclear is equal to about 2 shots of normal liquor, so it didn't take long before Kurt became extremely drunk and sick. He was seen stumbling, bumping into things, and eventually had to be taken outside for fresh air. It was a cold night, and both boys were only wearing t-shirts. Sam left Kurt leaning on a fence while he ran upstairs to get Kurt's jean jacket. He claimed he was gone only a few minutes, but because he was drinking too, it's unclear how long he was actually away. When he came back, Kurt was gone. Sam searched the nearby streets, even walking near the area where Kurt's body would later be found, but he couldn't find him. Thinking Kurt had gone home, Sam returned to the party. The next morning, Kurt's family knew something was wrong. He had never stayed out all night before. His parents and brothers searched everywhere, parks, alleys, and even dumpsters, but there was no sign of him. On Sunday, his mother Dorothy filed a missing person report and started passing out flyers. A neighbor told her about the party Kurt had attended, so she went to the house to ask questions. Debbie, the woman who hosted the party, first denied that any party had even happened. But after Dorothy confronted her again, showing proof from a pizza delivery man who had brought food there, Debbie finally admitted there had been a party and that Kurt had been there. She said he got sick and then just left, but she didn't seem to know what happened next. A few days later, at around 3 a.m., Dorothy got a strange phone call from Debbie. She said someone was sleeping in her basement and that it might be Kurt. Dorothy's husband Ken rushed to the house and checked the basement. There was a cot that looked recently used, but Kurt wasn't there. It seemed like someone had just been there and left. That same evening, 3 boys found Kurt's body lying in a shallow ravine behind a warehouse. only about 500 yards from the party house. The area was open and easy to see, and Kurt's bright yellow shirt should have stood out. The family said they had searched that same spot just the day before and hadn't seen him. This made them believe that Kurt's body was placed there later. Kurt was lying face up in a puddle with his arms out and legs straight. His shoes were missing, and one was found stuck between two rocks. He had no visible injuries, no gunshot, no stab wounds, and no signs of beating. The coroner said he had died 24 to 36 hours before being found, meaning he had been alive for at least 3 days after he disappeared. The cause of death was never determined. His blood alcohol level was 0.11, but that wasn't enough to kill him. Unfortunately, the investigation was very poor. Police didn't take many crime scene photos, didn't check the basement, and didn't collect DNA or fingerprints. There were no detailed notes about the weather, the body's position, or nearby objects, all things that could have helped. Many papers and pieces of evidence later went missing from the file. The truth about what happened to Kurt Sova remains unknown. His parents believed he had died in the basement, and that the people at the house panicked and later dumped his body in the ravine. No one was ever charged, and the case is still unsolved. You have probably never seen or answered a personal ad, but these ads have been around for centuries, long before dating apps existed. It was easy to lie in these ads and pretend to be someone else. This is exactly how Henri Désiré Landru, a French serial killer, found his victims. From 1914 to 1919, he lured women through personal ads and killed them. In the end, he became known as Bluebeard, after a cruel character in an old story. The story begins in April 1914 in Paris. Henri Landru, then 45 years old, placed an ad in the paper using a fake name. He was not looking for love, he was looking for women with money. A woman named Jeanne Couchet answered the ad. She was 39 years old and owned a shop. She also had a 15-year-old son, André. Landru came across as polite, charming, and well-mannered. He quickly gained her trust, and soon Jeanne and her son moved with him to a villa in Vernouillet. Jeanne helped him furnish the villa, and he promised to marry her. What she did not know was that Landru was already married and had a long history of tricking people out of money. He had even gone to prison for fraud before, but his greed did not stop. On January 4th, 1915, Jane and her son disappeared and were never seen again. Unlike many killers, Landru's childhood was not filled with abuse or trauma. He was born in Paris on April 12, 1869. His mother worked in laundry, and his father was a fireman at an ironworks factory. He went to Catholic school and graduated as a teenager. At 18, he joined the military and rose to the rank of sergeant. In 1891, he began a relationship with his cousin, who gave birth to his daughter. 2 years later, he married another woman and had 4 children with her. Although he was short, bald, and not very attractive, Landru had many lovers. People who knew him said he had a very strong libido. After Jeanne Couchet vanished, Landru moved to a house in Gambès. He lived a secretive life, continuing to place ads to meet women. More women came to see him, but none were ever seen leaving his house. Neighbors sometimes saw foul-smelling smoke rise from his chimney, and they complained about it. During this time, World War I was happening. Many women were lonely because their husbands were away or had died in the war. Landru used this to his advantage. Between 1914 and 1919, he killed at least 10 women and Jeanne's teenage son. He cut up their bodies and burned them in his oven. He also kept their belongings in his basement, along with detailed notes. He had a list of every woman he scammed or killed, and records of which fake name he used with each one. In total, he had been in contact with around 300 women. His only motive was money. Once he got it, he got rid of the women. Police began looking into him after a relative of one missing woman raised questions. When investigators searched his house, they found his secret notes and realized that each name on the list matched a missing person. They also looked inside his oven after hearing the neighbors' complaints and found hundreds of burned bone fragments and teeth. Landru was arrested and put on trial in 1921. His lawyers argued that no complete bodies were ever found, and that the bone fragments could have come from animals. On November 29, 1921, he was found guilty of 11 murders. On February 25, 1922, he was executed by guillotine. Until the very end, Landru never admitted to his crimes. In the small village of Peasenhall in Suffolk, England, a shocking murder took place in 1902. The victim was a young maid named Rose Annie Harsent, only 22 years old. Her death became known as the Peasenhall Mystery, and more than a century later, it still remains unsolved. Rose was born in March 1879 in Peasenhall. She was described as lively, kind, and attractive. She had a brother named Harry and was active in the Methodist Church, where she sang in the choir. By 1902, Rose was working at Providence House, a large country home owned by a tailor and church elder named William Crisp. She lived in the attic room of the house, which looked out over the nearby homes and inns. Across the way lived William Gardner, a 35-year-old man who worked at Smith & Sons, a local factory. Gardner was married, had 6 children, and was also a respected church elder. He too was active in the choir, where Rose sang. On the night of May 31, 1902, a violent thunderstorm swept across the village. At the same time, Rose received a letter. It told her to light a candle in her window at 10 p.m. as a signal, and then to meet the sender at midnight by the back door. Rose followed the instructions, but instead of a secret meeting, she was attacked. The next morning, Rose's father arrived to drop off some laundry. When he entered the kitchen, he found a horrifying sight. His daughter was lying at the bottom of the stairs in a pool of blood. At first, it looked like she had fallen, and her lamp had set her dress on fire. But it soon became clear this was no accident. Rose's face was badly bruised, a deep transverse laceration across the anterior neck, and multiple penetrating injuries to the thoracic region. There were burns on her body, and a bottle of paraffin, lamp oil, was nearby. It looked like someone had tried to set her body on fire to cover up the crime. The truth about Rose also came out in the autopsy. She was 6 months pregnant, and nobody knew for certain who the father was, but many suspected William Gardner. Witnesses had seen the two of them together in secret before, and some even claimed to have overheard them in the church chapel. Rumors spread quickly in the small village. The police gathered evidence, much of it pointing toward Gardner. The mysterious letter seemed to match his handwriting, and the envelope looked like one from his workplace. Neighbors saw him outside his house at 10 p.m., the same time Rose lit her candle. Muddy footprints leading from Providence House to Gardner's home also raised suspicion. A knife belonging to him was found with traces of blood, though it couldn't be proven to be human. Gardner denied everything. He said he never had an affair with Rose, wasn't the father of her baby, and wasn't there that night. His wife, Georgina, swore he had been home in bed. In court, the evidence was strong but circumstantial. There were no direct witnesses and no clear proof. The jury could not agree on a verdict. In fact, Gardner was tried twice, but both times the juries failed to reach a decision. In the end, the case was dropped. Gardner moved away with his family, and he lived until 1941. Some people believed Gardner was guilty, others thought he was innocent. A few even whispered that maybe his wife, Georgina, had killed Rose out of jealousy. Rose was laid to rest on June 5, 1902, in Peasenhall Cemetery. Her grave bears the sad words, "A light is from our household gone, a voice we loved is stilled." Elsie Parobek was a little girl who lived in Chicago in the early 1900s. She was born in 1906 to parents František and Karolina, who had come from eastern Bohemia. At that time, Bohemia was part of the Austria-Hungary Empire, but today it is part of the Czech Republic. Even though her parents gave her a name from their homeland, everyone in America called her Elsie. Her father was known as Frank, and he worked as a painter. Her mother stayed at home to take care of their big family. Life for Czech immigrants in Chicago was not always easy, but they built close communities where they could speak their own language and keep their traditions. Children often played outside without much supervision. and it was common for them to walk alone to visit friends or relatives. On Saturday, April 8, 1911, 5-year-old Elsie left her home on South Albany Avenue to visit her aunt, Julia Trampoda, who lived nearby. On her way, Elsie met her cousin Josie and some other children. They were watching an organ grinder play music on the street. Elsie stopped for a while to listen, but when the organ grinder moved on and the children followed, she decided not to go with them. That was the last time Elsie was seen by her family. Hours passed, and when Elsie did not arrive at her aunt's house, her mother became worried. At first, she thought Elsie might have gone to a friend's house and fallen asleep. But when night came and Elsie was still missing, her father rushed to the police station. At first, the police did not take the case very seriously and suggested Elsie had just stayed somewhere overnight. But by the next morning, it was clear something was wrong. Police Captain John McWeeny then took charge and began a serious search. News spread quickly, and soon many people were helping to look for Elsie. A girl claimed she had seen a wagon with Romany people in it, and inside was a girl who looked like Elsie. Police began to suspect that she had been kidnapped by someone from that community to work as a beggar. This theory was strengthened by a past case of another young girl who had once gone missing in a similar way. Elsie's father even offered his life savings, $50, as a reward for her safe return. Police searched canals, streets, and neighborhoods. They followed many leads, but nothing worked out. Rumors spread that she had been seen with the organ grinder or in different wagons, but none of these claims led to her. For weeks, the family lived in fear and hope. Newspaper articles shared Elsie's picture and described her blue eyes, blonde hair, and red dress. Thousands of people in Chicago prayed she would be found. Sadly, on May 9, 1911, about a month after she vanished, her body was found in the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal near Lockport, about 35 miles outside the city. The discovery devastated her parents. At first, her father could not even recognize her because the body had been in the water for some time. But her mother confirmed it was her daughter. Doctors examined the body and found she had not drowned, meaning she had been killed before being placed in the water. Some believed she had been suffocated. Her funeral was held on May 12th, and nearly 3,000 people came to mourn. The Czech community and the whole city grieved for her. Police investigated many suspects, including a strange local man and others, but no one was ever proven guilty. Newspapers called it one of the biggest searches for a missing child the city had ever seen. Even today, her story is remembered as a sad and mysterious crime that was never fully solved. In the spring of 1924, as the snow melted around Little Lava Lake near Bend, Oregon, a dark secret was uncovered. Beneath the frozen surface of the lake were the bodies of 3 missing fur trappers. Their deaths remain one of Oregon's most puzzling, unsolved mysteries, nearly a century later. The story began in late 1923. 3 men from Bend decided to spend the winter trapping furs in the Deschutes National Forest. Their names were Edward "Ed" Nichols, aged 50, Roy Wilson, aged 35, and Edward Morris, the youngest at 25. Nichols worked as a caretaker for a cabin and looked after foxes kept there, while Wilson and Morris were loggers who trapped furs on the side. The cabin they used belonged to a local contractor, Edward Logan. Instead of paying rent, the 3 men agreed to care for Logan's 6 foxes. By December, they had already gathered many valuable furs. Nichols returned to Bend before Christmas to sell them and was said to be in good spirits. He later went back to the cabin, and that was the last time most people in town saw him. On January 15, 1924, a man named Alan Wilcoxon visited the cabin on his way to Elk Lake. He spent the night with the trappers and later said that they seemed happy and healthy. No one knew at the time that he would be the last person to see them alive. When weeks passed with no word from the men, their families grew worried. By spring, searchers went out into the forest. What they found was strange and troubling. The cabin was empty, with food burned in pots and breakfast dishes still set on the table. Traps were left unattended, animals had died in them, and the foxes were gone. A hungry cat was found inside, clearly not fed for months. Even more chilling, a blood-stained hammer was discovered near the fox pen. The men's sled was later found abandoned with bloodstains on it. Tracks led across the frozen lake, where a hole had been cut into the ice. Bits of hair, blood, and even a tooth were discovered nearby. It became clear that something terrible had happened. In April, when the lake ice began to melt, searchers found the bodies. Nichols, Wilson, and Morris were floating in the water, wrapped in cloth. They had all been shot and beaten, likely with the hammer found earlier. Their bodies had been dragged across the ice on the sled before being dropped into the lake. The police tried to piece together what happened. They believed more than one killer was involved, since Wilson had been a Marine and would have been hard to overpower alone. One suspect was a man named Charles Lee Kimsey, who had argued with Nichols in the past. Kimsey was skilled with weapons and had a criminal record for robbery and attempted murder. Suspicion grew when it was discovered that, shortly after the trappers disappeared, a man sold furs in Portland under Nichols's trapping license. Witnesses thought this man could have been Kimsey. For years, he was hunted by the law and was eventually caught in 1933, but denied killing the trappers. He claimed he had been working in Colorado at the time, and his employer supported this. Kimsey was never charged with the Lava Lake murders, though he did go to prison for other crimes. Other names came up, including a school teacher linked to suspicious deaths, but no solid evidence was ever found. To this day, no one knows for certain who killed the three men or why. Margaret Martin was a 19-year-old student from Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. She was a quiet and shy girl, but also very hardworking and serious about her goals. She had many friends and was known as a kind young woman. Margaret graduated from Kingston High School in 1937 and later joined Wilkes-Barre Business College to learn secretarial skills. She studied very hard and even graduated with honors. Just 17 days after finishing business college, something tragic happened. On Saturday, December 17, 1938, Margaret received a phone call. The caller was a man she did not know. He told her that he was from out of town and was setting up an insurance company. He said he needed secretaries and that he had gotten her name from her college. Margaret was very happy to hear this because she had just graduated and wanted to start working. She agreed to meet the man at Kingston Corners, a spot close to her home. She told her mom she would be right back before leaving. Sadly, that was the last time her family saw her alive. A witness later reported that he saw a young woman who looked like Margaret getting into a brown Plymouth or a black sedan. The driver was described as a man in his late 20s, slightly overweight, with sandy-colored hair. This was likely the man who had called her. When Margaret did not return home, her parents grew very worried. She was a girl who always valued time and would never leave her family waiting without a reason. They quickly informed the police that something was wrong. Unfortunately, there was a newspaper strike going on at the time, so her disappearance was not widely shared in the news. Many people in the community did not even know that Margaret was missing. 4 days later, on December 21, 1938, a young muskrat hunter named Anthony Rozakowski made a terrible discovery. While setting traps near Keelersburg Creek in Wyoming County, he noticed a burlap sack floating in the water. Inside was Margaret's body. Her mother was the one who had to identify her, which was heartbreaking. The condition of Margaret's body showed she had suffered greatly. She had deep cuts on her body, signs of assault, and had been strangled to death. Police quickly launched a huge search. Dozens of state troopers searched the area, and at first they were hopeful they would find the killer. But no strong evidence was discovered. A short time later, investigators found burned clothing in an abandoned sawmill about 15 miles away. The clothes matched what Margaret had been wearing the day she disappeared. Footprints outside suggested she had been brought there by force. Police believed this might have been the place where she was killed. On December 24th, the day before Christmas, while most families were celebrating, Margaret's family was forced to bury her. Over 1,000 people attended her funeral, but her parents were so broken that they spent the service scanning the crowd, wondering if her killer was standing among them. Years passed, and police continued to search, but no one was ever charged. At one point, a young man even confessed, but it turned out he was lying, and the case went cold. Some investigators believed her killer might have been a local man who knew the sawmill and the remote area. Others thought it could have been a traveling serial killer. Around that time, other young women in Pennsylvania were also attacked and murdered in similar ways, but no one was ever caught. To this day, Margaret's killer has never been identified. Evelyn Dick was born on October 13, 1920, in Beamsville, Canada. Her parents, Donald and Alexandra McLean, had moved to Canada from Scotland hoping for better work opportunities. Soon after Evelyn was born, her father got a job as a conductor for the Hamilton Street Railway, so the family moved to Hamilton and lived at 214 Rosslyn Avenue. Evelyn's childhood was not very happy. Her parents argued a lot. Her father often drank, and her mother was strict and wanted to climb the social ladder. They were very protective of Evelyn, their only child. They did not let her play with neighborhood kids, insisting instead that she mix with children from wealthier families. Her father's job did not pay much, so it was a surprise when Evelyn was moved from a public school to the expensive Loretto Academy. People in town began to gossip. Some believed that her father was stealing money from the railway to pay for their lifestyle. As Evelyn grew older, she became very attractive and drew attention from many men. Her mother pushed her to marry someone rich so she could live comfortably. Evelyn went to parties and mingled with people in high society, but she was never fully accepted. Instead, she spent much of her time with older men. In 1941, Evelyn became pregnant. In 1942, she gave birth to a daughter, Heather. To avoid gossip about being unmarried, she told people she had a husband who was away fighting in the war. Her mother mostly raised Heather, while Evelyn continued her social life. In 1944, Evelyn had another baby, a boy named Peter. But when she came home from the hospital, the baby was not with her. She told neighbors she had given him up for adoption. Her parents' marriage eventually ended. Evelyn moved into an apartment with her mother and daughter. In 1945, Evelyn met John Dick, a Russian-born man 15 years older than her. He was a streetcar driver and treated Heather kindly. She told him she was a widow, and he quickly fell in love with her. Within weeks, they married on October 4, 1945. Evelyn believed he was wealthy, but after the marriage, she realized he was not. The marriage was troubled. Evelyn continued to see other men, and John eventually moved out to stay with his cousin. He later threatened to expose Evelyn's father's thefts unless he helped him save the marriage. Donald was furious and even threatened to kill John. On March 6, 1946, John Dick disappeared. 10 days later, children playing near Hamilton's escarpment found a human torso. It was confirmed to be John. Police questioned Evelyn. She gave several strange stories, including one about a mysterious Italian man and another about her friend Bill Bohozuk being involved. Bloodstains matching John's type were found in a car she borrowed, and in her home, police discovered blood-stained shoes, a pipe with bullet holes, and most shocking of all, a suitcase in the attic containing the body of a baby boy set in concrete. This was believed to be Evelyn's son Peter, the child she claimed she had given up for adoption. Evelyn, her father Donald, and her friend Bill were charged with John's murder. Evelyn's first trial in 1946 drew huge media attention. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to hang. But her lawyers appealed, and in 1947 her conviction was overturned. Instead, she was found guilty of manslaughter in the death of her son Peter and sentenced to life in prison. In 1958, after serving 11 years, Evelyn was granted parole. She disappeared from public life under a new identity. In 1985, she was given a pardon, but no one knows for sure what became of her. Some believe she remarried and had another child. Anne Noblitt, The Deep Freeze Murder, England, 1957. The case became known in the media as the Deep Freeze Murder. The victim was a young woman named Anne Noblitt, and her tragic death remains unsolved even today. Because there was no DNA testing at the time, police had a very hard time solving the case. On December 30th, 1957, Anne attended a holiday party with friends. She was in good spirits, and everything seemed normal throughout the evening. Later that night, she decided to take the bus home. Around 6 p.m., she was last seen by a friend named Shirley Edwards, who watched her get onto the bus. Nothing seemed unusual, except for one strange detail. Shirley noticed a car parked nearby with its rear lights glowing in the dark. That car disappeared shortly after. When Anne failed to come home, her parents quickly grew worried. They did not wait long before calling the police. A search party was formed, and even dogs were brought in to try to track her. Despite all their efforts, there was no sign of Anne. For a whole month, her family lived in fear and confusion. On January 31st, 1958, their worst fears were confirmed. 2 men walking their dog in Rose Grove Woods came across Anne's body. She was found about 7 miles from where she was last seen. Her remains were fully clothed, and some of her personal belongings were nearby. Sadly, it was clear she had been strangled and assaulted. At first, police thought she had simply frozen due to the harsh winter weather. But further investigation revealed something far more disturbing. Anne's body had been refrigerated before being left in the woods. Experts realized that she had been stored in some kind of cold unit, such as a freezer or industrial refrigerator, for over a month. This fact shocked investigators and gave the case its deep freeze murder name. There were more troubling details. Her last meal was still undigested in her stomach, meaning she had been killed very soon after being taken on December 30th. Police concluded that she must have been picked up between the bus stop and her home, possibly by someone she knew, since she might have entered the vehicle willingly. Investigators searched every possible location within a 30-mile radius where a freezer could have been kept. Factories, farms, and other buildings, but they found nothing useful. The only clear detail was that her body was moved to the woods just 1 day before it was discovered. This meant her killer had kept her frozen for more than a month before finally disposing of her. Despite the efforts of detectives, no strong leads ever came to light. The killer was never identified, and the crime remains one of the most chilling, unsolved murders in Britain. Mary Ann Schmidt was born on October 30th, 1950, in West Germany. Her parents were Helmut and Elisabeth Schmidt. She grew up with 5 siblings: Helmut Jr., Hans, Peter, Trixie, and Wolfgang. Later, when the family moved to Australia, another brother, Norbert, was born. When the Schmidts arrived in New South Wales, they first stayed in a migrant hostel before settling in a small town called Temora. In 1963, Helmut Sr. became sick with Hodgkin's disease, so the family moved to Sydney so he could get proper medical care. Sadly, in June 1964, he passed away, leaving Elizabeth with 7 children to raise alone. The Schmidts' neighbors in Sydney were Jim and Jeanette Teague. Living with them was their granddaughter, Christine Sherrick, who was the same age as Mary Ann. Christine's father had died years earlier, and although her mother had remarried, she chose to live with her grandparents. Mary Ann and Christine quickly became best friends. In early January 1965, the 2 girls and the Schmidt children went to Cronulla Beach several times. On Monday, January 11th, Mary Ann and Christine, along with 4 of the younger Schmidt children, traveled by train to the beach. When they arrived, it was windy and the beach was closed, so they sat near the rocks and had a picnic. At one point, Christine wandered off alone, though nobody knew where she went. Wolfgang, Mary Ann's younger brother, noticed a teenage boy catching crabs nearby. He later said he saw this same boy again with Mary Ann and Christine. However, his story about what the boy carried, a spear gun, knife, or both, changed over time. Around 1 p.m., Mary Ann and Christine told the younger children they would go fetch the bags they had left near the rocks. Instead, they walked into the sand dunes. When Peter, one of the younger brothers, said they were going the wrong way, the girls laughed and kept walking. The children waited for hours, but Mary Ann and Christine never came back. By 5 p.m., the younger siblings returned home alone. The girls were reported missing that evening. The next day, January 12th, a man walking through the dunes with his nephews discovered a body buried in the sand. At first, he thought it was a mannequin, but soon realized it was a young woman. Police uncovered two bodies lying close together. They were Marianne and Christine. Both girls had sustained severe assaults. Christine suffered a cranial fracture along with multiple stab wounds. Marianne presented with a deep cervical laceration extending to near complete transection, in addition to repeated stab injuries. Evidence suggested attempted assault in both cases. Police searched for the murder weapons but never found them. Investigators interviewed about 7,000 people, making it the biggest case in Australia at the time. Still, the crime went unsolved. Over the years, three main suspects were considered. Alan Bassett, a convicted killer who gave police a strange painting that some believed showed hidden clues. Christopher Wilder, who later became a serial killer in the U.S. during the 1980s. Derek Percy, who was imprisoned for murdering a young girl in 1969 and suspected in several other child killings. Despite these leads, no one was ever charged. DNA testing in later years gave police some hope, but samples were either too weak or lost. For the families, the pain never went away. Marianne's mother, Elizabeth, passed away in 2009 without ever knowing who killed her daughter. On the night of November 17, 1973, 5 teenagers went to Gitche Manitou Preserve, a quiet park on the border of South Dakota and Iowa. The group included 17-year-old Roger Essam, his friend 18-year-old Stuart, Stuart's 14-year-old brother Dana, their 15-year-old friend Michael, and 13-year-old Sandra Chesky. Sandra had just started dating Roger, and the group planned to hang out, play music, and sit around a fire. They parked Stuart's van near an old stone shelter and walked closer to the river to build a fire. The boys played guitar, shared a joint, and talked while Sandra sat close to Roger. They didn't know that 3 brothers, Alan, David, and James Fryer, were also in the preserve that night. The Fryer brothers were carrying shotguns and were supposedly looking to hunt deer. Instead, they came across the teens and decided to sneak up on them. At first, the teens heard twigs snapping, but thought it was just animals. Then Roger saw someone and called out, asking who was there. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. Roger was hit and killed instantly. Panic broke out. Stuart was also shot, and Michael grabbed Sandra and told her not to run, or she would be killed too. The Fryer brothers came out of the darkness, claiming they were police officers and saying the teens were in trouble for having marijuana. Michael stepped out and asked why they were shooting if they were really cops. Alan then shot him in the shoulder. The brothers tied the teens' hands and forced them toward their truck. Sandra tried to help the injured Michael while Stuart was dragged along even though he was badly hurt. The brothers separated Sandra from the boys. Alan put her in their truck, untied her, and told her not to worry. Sandra asked about Roger, but Alan lied and said Roger had only been shot with a tranquilizer and would be fine. Sandra saw her friends being marched down the road at gunpoint. That was the last time she saw them alive. The Fryer brothers then lined the boys up near Stuart's van, shined the headlights on them, and executed them one by one. Dana, Michael, and Stuart were all killed by close-range shotgun blasts. The brothers left their bodies in the field, abandoned Stuart's van in a parking lot, and drove off with Sandra. Alan spent hours driving Sandra around. He stopped for gas, bought her a soda, and told her he was the leader of his brothers. Eventually, Alan drove her to an old farmhouse where the other 2 brothers were waiting. While Alan and David stepped away, James stayed with Sandra and assaulted her. Later, Alan returned and decided he would take Sandra home instead of killing her. Before dropping her off at her house around dawn, Alan warned Sandra that if she told anyone, they would only get a few years in jail and then come back to kill her. Sandra, terrified, ran into her home. The next morning, a couple test driving a car came across the bodies of the 3 boys lying in the preserve. Police were called, and Roger's body was later found near the campfire where he had first been shot. Sandra eventually went to the police and told them what happened. They didn't understand why she had been spared. But soon, evidence matched what she said, and the Fryer brothers were caught. Alan Fryer and James Fryer were both convicted of first-degree murder and received 5 consecutive life sentences each, with no chance of parole. Their younger brother, David Fryer, agreed to testify against them and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, for which he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. The Alton Child Murders, Illinois, 1985. Alton Coleman was born on November 6, 1955, in Waukegan, Illinois. He was the third of 5 children. His mother, who worked several jobs and also worked on the streets, did not want him. She once threw him in a trash can, but his grandmother rescued him. Alton grew up in a troubled home filled with rejection, drugs, and abuse. According to people who knew him, he was exposed to terrible things, including abuse and disturbing practices from both his mother and grandmother. He was also teased by other kids because he wet his pants often and was called names. As a young boy, Alton joined a street gang and started breaking the law. He eventually dropped out of school in the 9th grade. At just 18 years old in December 1973, he committed his first known serious crime. Along with a partner, he kidnapped a 54-year-old woman named Eleanor McIntyre at gunpoint, assaulted her, and stole her belongings. He went to prison but was released later. Over the next years, he was often arrested for different crimes, including assault, but sometimes avoided long sentences because cases were dismissed or juries did not convict him. In 1983, Alton met a woman named Deborah Brown. Deborah was born in 1962 in Waukegan. Unlike Alton, she came from a stable family and had no criminal history. At the time, she was engaged to another man, but she eventually left her fiancé and family to be with Alton. Together, they began one of the most violent crime sprees in U.S. history. In 1984, after being arrested for another assault but released before trial, Alton and Deborah began traveling from state to state. Their crimes included kidnappings, robberies, assaults, and murders. Many of their victims were women and children. One of the first victims was a 9-year-old girl named Vernita Wheat, whom Alton abducted in Wisconsin. She was later found dead. Soon after, they attacked 2 young girls in Indiana, killing one and leaving the other for dead, though she survived. In another case, they befriended a young woman named Donna Williams from church in Gary, Indiana. She later went missing, and her body was discovered weeks later. The couple moved through several states, leaving a trail of violence. They invaded homes, beat and robbed elderly couples, and killed people they had just met. In Ohio, they murdered a woman named Virginia Temple and her 10-year-old daughter, Rochelle. Evidence showed Rochelle had been assaulted. Later, they tied up and attacked more elderly victims, leaving some for dead. By July 1984, the FBI placed Alton Coleman on its 10 most wanted list. The nationwide manhunt intensified as their crimes grew more brutal. On July 19th, the body of a 79-year-old man named Eugene Scott was found in Indiana. The next day, police finally caught Alton and Deborah in Evanston, Illinois, after a citizen recognized him. They surrendered without a fight. Both were tried separately in several states. Alton Coleman received multiple death sentences for his crimes. He represented himself in court at times, even trying to blame Deborah for murders, but this failed. Deborah Brown also received death sentences, but later they were reduced to life in prison because of her mental health issues. On April 22, 2002, Alton Coleman was executed by lethal injection in Ohio. Family members of his victims attended his execution. Deborah Brown is still in prison, serving many decades behind bars. In 2005, she expressed regret and apologized to the families of the victims. In 1994, New Zealand was shocked by one of its most famous murder cases. It became known as the Bain family murders. Almost an entire family was killed inside their home, and only one person, David Bain, survived. The case quickly divided the nation, with some people believing David was guilty and others believing his father Robin was the true killer. The Bain family lived in Dunedin, a city in the south of New Zealand. The parents were Robin and Margaret Bain, and they had 4 children: David, Arawa, Laniet, and Stephen. At first, the family lived in Papua New Guinea, where Robin worked as a teacher. They later moved back to New Zealand in 1988. Robin and Margaret's marriage had fallen apart, and they often argued. Robin even lived in a caravan instead of the family home most of the time. The house was messy, falling apart, and unpleasant to live in. Rumors also spread that Robin may have been hurting his youngest daughter, Laniet. Margaret believed strange spiritual things too. She thought Robin was possessed by a demon and even wrote about this in her diary. The children all had different relationships with their parents. David, the oldest, was very close to his mother, but not to his father. At 22, David was studying music and wanted to be an opera singer. He also worked as a paperboy in the mornings. On June 20th, 1994, David did his usual paper round early in the morning. Around 7 a.m., he called emergency services in a panic. He told them his entire family had been killed. When police arrived, they found a shocking scene. David's mother, Margaret, and his sisters, Arawa and Laniet, were dead in their beds. His younger brother, Stephen, who was only 14, had been killed in his room after a violent struggle. Finally, his father, Robin, was found in the lounge with a bullet wound to the head. Beside Robin's body was the family rifle, which actually belonged to David. On the family computer, someone had typed a message: "Sorry, you are the only one who deserves to stay." From the start, police had 2 main suspects, Robin or David. At first glance, it looked like Robin may have killed his family and then himself. But soon, evidence began to point at David instead. Investigators noticed that the angle of Robin's head wound made it almost impossible for him to have shot himself. His fingerprints weren't on the rifle, and there was no gunpowder on his hands. On the other hand, there were suspicious details about David. He had injuries on his body that he couldn't explain. He admitted he was the only one who knew where the key to unlock the rifle was kept. And most importantly, his timeline didn't make sense. He returned home from his paper round around 6:42 a.m., but he didn't call the police until 7:09 a.m., almost half an hour later. He said he zoned out during this time. In 1995, David Bain went to trial for the murders of his family. The prosecution argued that David killed each member of his family in the early morning, fought with Stephen, washed his bloody clothes, and then went on his paper round as if nothing had happened. They said he waited for his father to come inside and then shot him, arranging the scene to look like he did it to himself. David's defense team claimed that Robin was the true killer. They said Robin typed the note on the computer and then killed himself. In the end, David Bain was found guilty on 5 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 16 years before parole.